Arrogant millionaire was challenged by a friend to marry an ugly woman for a day, but breaks down in tears when he discovers something. Jack Thompson looked at himself in the mirror of his luxurious penthouse, adjusting his Italian silk tie. At 35, he was the very image of success, handsome, rich, and powerful. His reflection gave him an arrogant smile, the same one that had captivated countless beautiful women over the years. The private elevator chime announced the arrival of his friend Alex. Jack opened the door with a carefree gesture. "Jack, my friend," exclaimed Alex, entering with a bottle of champagne in hand, ready to celebrate another successful deal. Jack smiled, taking 2 crystal glasses. "I'm always ready to celebrate, Alex, although to tell the truth, these deals no longer pose a challenge for me." Alex raised an eyebrow as Jack poured the champagne. "So the great Jack Thompson no longer finds excitement in business? What a shame. I guess we'll have to find new ways to entertain you." Something in Alex's tone caught Jack's attention. "What do you have in mind?" Alex took a sip of his champagne before answering. "Well, since you ask, I've been thinking of a little challenge for you. Something that really tests your abilities." Jack laughed. "My abilities? Come on, Alex, we both know there's nothing I can't achieve." "Are you sure?" Alex smiled mischievously. "Because I have something in mind that might take you out of your comfort zone." Jack's ego inflated at the insinuation. "Shoot, whatever it is, I can handle it." Alex came closer, lowering his voice as if he was about to reveal a secret. "The challenge is simple, my friend. Marry for a day a woman you wouldn't normally look at twice. Someone who doesn't meet your high standards of beauty." Jack almost choked on his champagne. "What? Marry an ugly woman? Is this a joke?" "Not at all," Alex replied, his expression serious. 24 hours, Jack. A whole day treating this woman as if she were the love of your life. No belittling, no grimaces of disgust. Treating her with the same respect and attention you would give a supermodel. Jack frowned, his mind working quickly. "And what do I gain from this?" "Besides the satisfaction of proving yourself," Alex smiled, "I'll make a donation of $1 million to the charity of your choice." Jack's eyes lit up at the mention of money. Not that he needed it, but the idea of winning that challenge and being able to brag about his generosity was tempting. "And if I refuse?" he asked, trying to maintain an uninterested tone. Alex shrugged. "Then I guess I'll have to accept that the great Jack Thompson has his limits after all, that there are challenges that not even he can overcome." Those words touched a nerve in Jack. His pride couldn't bear the idea of being considered incapable of something. "I accept," he finally said, extending his hand, "but I want it to be clear that I'm doing it for the donation, not because I care about your stupid challenge." Alex shook his hand, an enigmatic smile on his lips. "Of course, my friend. Of course." As Alex said goodbye, Jack was left alone in his penthouse, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Little did he know that this challenge was about to change his life forever. The next morning, Jack woke up with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. He had spent the night tossing and turning in bed, his mind full of images of the woman Alex would have chosen for him. Would she really be as unattractive as he feared? Could he maintain his composure for a whole day? He dressed carefully, choosing a designer suit that highlighted his athletic figure. If he was going to spend the day with someone unattractive, at least he would look impeccable. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doorbell of his apartment rang. Jack took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for what was to come. He opened the door and found himself face to face with Alex and a woman who, indeed, did not meet his usual standards of beauty. "Jack, I present to you Sarah," said Alex with a smile that seemed to hide something. "Your wife for a day." Jack had to make a conscious effort not to show his displeasure. Sarah was thin, yes, but her facial features were, in his opinion, disproportionate and inharmonious. Her nose was too big for her face, her eyes too close together, and her chin too pronounced. She dressed simply, with a floral dress that did nothing to improve her figure. "A pleasure," said Jack, extending his hand coldly. Sarah took it, and he noticed that her grip was firm and confident, something that slightly surprised him. "The pleasure is mine, Jack," Sarah replied with a voice that, to his surprise, was melodious and pleasant. Her eyes, though small, sparkled with an intelligence that momentarily disconcerted him. Alex watched them with evident amusement. "Well, I'll leave you to get to know each other. Remember, Jack, 24 hours, and I'll be watching." With that, Alex left, leaving Jack alone with Sarah. An awkward silence settled between them. "Well," Jack finally said, forcing a smile, "I guess we should start our day. Do you have any preference on what to do?" Sarah looked him straight in the eyes, and for a moment, Jack felt exposed, as if she could see through his facade. "Actually, yes," she replied with a confidence that took him by surprise. "I'd love to visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Have you been there recently?" Jack blinked, disconcerted. He had expected her to suggest something more common. A walk in the park, maybe, or go shopping. No, actually, I haven't. It's been years since I've gone." "Perfect, then," Sarah smiled. "It will be a new experience for both of us." As they went down in the elevator, Jack found himself studying Sarah out of the corner of his eye. There was something in her posture, in the way she moved, that didn't fit with the image he had formed of her. She seemed confident. In the car, Jack tried to make some trivial conversation. "So, what do you do, Sarah?" "I'm an art restorer," she replied, her eyes lighting up. "I specialize in Renaissance paintings." Jack almost lost control of the steering wheel. Art restorer? This woman he had judged so quickly by her appearance? "Wow," he said, trying to hide his surprise. "It must be a fascinating job." "It is," Sarah nodded. "Each painting is a world unto itself, full of stories and secrets. It's like traveling through time every time I work on a piece." As Sarah spoke, Jack found himself listening with genuine interest. Her passion for art was evident, and she spoke with an eloquence that strongly contrasted with her appearance. They arrived at the museum, and Jack surprised himself by offering his arm to Sarah as they climbed the stairs. It was an automatic gesture, born of years of refined manners, but for some reason, it felt different this time. Once inside, Sarah took the initiative, guiding him through the halls with the confidence of someone who knows the place like the back of their hand. She stopped in front of Washington Crossing the Delaware by Emanuel Leutzer, and Jack prepared himself for the typical superficial comment about the beauty of the painting. However, what came out of Sarah's mouth left him speechless. "Did you know that this painting is considered one of the most iconic and controversial works in American art history?" she began, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Leutzer, a German artist, painted this scene of American history while living in Germany. The painting is full of historical inaccuracies, but it captures the spirit and determination of the American Revolution in a way that resonated deeply with the public. Jack found himself looking at the painting with new eyes, fascinated not only by Sarah's explanation, but by the passion with which she spoke. For a moment, he completely forgot about her appearance, captivated by her knowledge and enthusiasm. As they moved through the museum, Sarah continued to surprise him with her vast knowledge and insightful observations. Jack found himself asking questions, genuinely interested in learning more. By the time they left the museum hours later, Jack realized that he hadn't looked at his watch once. Time had flown, and to his surprise, he had enjoyed every minute. As they walked towards the car, Sarah smiled at him. "Thank you for this day, Jack. It's been wonderful to share my passion for art with you." Jack looked at her, and for the first time all day, he really saw her. Not as the ugly woman Alex had presented to him, but as a fascinating and passionate person. And although her appearance hadn't changed somehow, it no longer seemed so important. "The pleasure was mine, Sarah," he replied, and to his surprise, he meant it. "Would you like to continue our conversation over dinner?" Sarah's smile widened, lighting up her whole face. "I'd love to." As they headed to the restaurant, Jack realized that this challenge was turning out to be much more than he had expected, and for the first time in a long time, he felt excited about what the rest of the day might bring. After the museum visit, Jack and Sarah decided to take a walk through Central Park before dinner. The afternoon sun bathed the trees in a golden light, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Jack, still surprised by how much he had enjoyed the museum, found himself relaxing in Sarah's company. They walked side by side, their steps naturally synchronized. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, but comfortable and reflective. It was Sarah who finally broke the silence. "You know, Jack," she said, carefully choosing her words, "when Alex told me about this challenge, I wasn't sure what to expect. But I must admit that you've pleasantly surprised me." Jack felt a pang of guilt as he remembered his initial thoughts about her. To be honest, Sarah, it's you who has surprised me. I've never met anyone with so much knowledge and passion for art. Sarah smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. People often underestimate me because of my appearance. It's something I've gotten used to over time. Those words hit Jack hard. He realized that he himself had fallen into that error, judging her even before knowing her. "I'm sorry if I made you feel that way," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "I think we all have a lot to learn about not judging others by their appearance." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of surprise and appreciation. "Thank you, Jack. I didn't expect that response from you." They stopped in front of the lake, watching couples rowing in small boats. A group of children ran by, laughing and playing without a care. "Isn't it fascinating?" Sarah commented, pointing to the scene in front of them. "How people can find so much joy in the simplest things in life." Jack followed her gaze, really observing his surroundings for the first time in a long time. The children playing, the couples enjoying a quiet moment, the elderly sitting on benches feeding the pigeons. Everyday scenes he had always taken for granted. "You're right," he admitted. "Sometimes we're so focused on our own lives, on accumulating wealth or achievements, that we forget to appreciate these little things." Sarah nodded, her gaze lost on the horizon. "True wealth, Jack, is not in what we possess, but in what we experience and in the connections we form with others." Her words resonated deeply with Jack. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning his priorities and values. When was the last time he had stopped to enjoy a sunset? When had he had such a deep conversation? Jack remained silent for a moment, reflecting on Sarah's words. "I've never seen it that way," he finally admitted. "I've always measured success in terms of tangible achievements, money, properties, conquests." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of understanding and challenge. "And has that made you happy, Jack?" The question took him by surprise. Was he happy? He had everything he had always believed he wanted, and yet, "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I guess I've never really stopped to think about it." They continued walking, this time in reflective silence. Jack found himself observing Sarah out of the corner of his eye, noticing details he had previously overlooked. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about, the grace with which she moved, the warmth of her smile. "Tell me more about yourself, Sarah," he said suddenly, surprising himself with his genuine interest. "How did you become an art restorer?" Sarah's face lit up at the question. "Well, I've always been in love with art. As a child, my parents would take me to museums and galleries, and I could spend hours in front of a single painting, imagining the stories behind each brushstroke." As Sarah spoke, Jack found himself completely captivated. Her passion was contagious, and for the first time in a long time he felt a spark of something he couldn't immediately identify. Was it curiosity? Admiration? But it wasn't until I visited a restorer's workshop that I knew I wanted to dedicate myself to this, Sarah continued. Seeing how he gave new life to artworks that seemed lost, it was magical. I knew at that moment that I wanted to be part of that process, to preserve beauty and history for future generations. Jack nodded, genuinely impressed. "It must be a very rewarding job." "It is," Sarah smiled, "although it also has its challenges. Sometimes I spend months working on a single piece, and there are moments of frustration. But when you finally see the result, when a masterpiece regains its original splendor, there are no words to describe that feeling." They stopped in front of an ornamental fountain. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with pink and golden hues. Jack surprised himself by admiring how the sunset light illuminated Sarah's face, giving it an almost ethereal glow. "And you, Jack?" she asked, turning to him. "What really passionate you?" The question left him momentarily speechless. What passionate him? He had spent so much time pursuing success and wealth that he wasn't sure he remembered what really moved him. I'm not sure," he finally admitted. "I guess I've focused so much on financial success that I've forgotten to ask myself what really makes me happy." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of understanding and challenge. "It's never too late to rediscover it, you know. Sometimes we need to step out of our comfort zone to find what really moves us." Her words resonated with Jack more than he expected. He realized that this day, which had begun as a simple challenge, was turning into something much deeper. "You're right," he finally said, "and I think this day is being a good start for that." Sarah smiled, and Jack felt something warm expand in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt genuinely connected to someone, and the feeling was as unexpected as it was pleasant. "How about we go to dinner?" Jack suggested. "I'd like to keep hearing about your work and your passions." "I'd love that," Sarah replied, and together they headed towards the park exit. As they walked, Jack realized that he was no longer thinking about the challenge, or Sarah's appearance, or what Alex would think. For the first time in a long time, he was living in the moment, genuinely interested in getting to know the person beside him. And that realization, more than anything else, filled him with an emotion he hadn't felt in years, the excitement of discovering something new, not just about the world, but about himself. The restaurant Jack chose was one of the most exclusive in New York, a place where he would normally take his dates to impress them. However, as they sat at a table by the window overlooking the illuminated city, he realized that he wasn't trying to impress Sarah. For the first time, he really wanted to get to know someone beyond appearances. The sommelier approached with the wine list, and Jack, out of habit, was about to order the most expensive wine. But he stopped and looked at Sarah. "Do you have any preference in wines?" he asked, surprising himself by considering someone else's opinion. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with a glint of amusement. "Actually, yes. How about we try a Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon? They have a complexity that would complement dinner well." Jack blinked, impressed once again. "Of course," he nodded to the sommelier, who seemed equally surprised by the choice. Once alone, Jack found himself nervous, something he hadn't felt in years. "So, Sarah," he began, "tell me more about your work. What project are you currently working on?" Sarah's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I'm restoring a little-known Winslow Homer. It's fascinating work because it requires not only technical skill, but also a deep knowledge of the artist's style and era." As Sarah spoke, Jack found himself completely absorbed. The passion in her voice, the way her hands moved as she explained the technical details, all of it made her shine in a way he had never seen in any of his previous dates. "It must be incredible," said Jack, genuinely impressed, "to be able to touch history in that way, to give new life to something that has survived centuries." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining. "It is. Every brushstroke tells a story, and my job is to make sure those stories can continue to be told." The conversation flowed with an ease that surprised Jack. They talked about art, history, their life experiences. Jack found himself sharing things he had never shared with anyone before, about his hidden insecurities behind his facade of confidence, about the pressure to maintain an image of constant success. "Sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in a life that I no longer know if I want," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "As if I had been chasing an idea of success that no longer satisfies me." Sarah looked at him with understanding. "True success, Jack, is being true to oneself. It doesn't matter how much money or power you have if at the end of the day you don't recognize yourself in the mirror." Her words hit Jack hard. When was the last time he had really looked at himself in the mirror, beyond checking his appearance? As the night progressed, Jack realized that he was experiencing something completely new. It wasn't just physical or intellectual attraction, it was a deeper connection, a feeling of being seen and understood for the first time in a long time. When dessert arrived, an elaborate creation by the chef, Jack barely noticed it. He was too absorbed in the conversation, in the way Sarah laughed, in how her eyes shone when she talked about something she was passionate about. "You know," Sarah said as she took a sip of her dessert wine, "when Alex told me about this challenge, I thought it would be a horrible experience. I expected an arrogant and superficial man who would treat me like an object, but you've pleasantly surprised me, Jack." Jack felt a pang of guilt as he remembered his initial thoughts. "To be honest, Sarah, I had my prejudices too. But this day has been a revelation. You've made me question many things I took for granted." Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "That's the beautiful thing about life, don't you think? It can always surprise us. There's always something new to learn if we're willing to open our eyes and our hearts." At that moment, looking into Sarah's eyes, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of something new, exciting, and a little scary. He realized that he was no longer following a script. He was no longer acting. For the first time in a long time, he was genuinely being himself. When they left the restaurant, night had completely fallen over New York. The city lights shone like earthly stars, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "Would you like to take a walk?" Jack asked, not wanting the night to end. Sarah nodded with a smile. "I'd love to." As they walked through the illuminated streets, their hands accidentally brushed. Jack felt an electric current run through his body, a sensation that took him completely by surprise. Without thinking, he took Sarah's hand in his. She looked at him, surprised, but not displeased. And at that moment, under the lights of New York, Jack realized that something fundamental had changed in him. He no longer saw Sarah as the ugly woman from the challenge. He saw her as she really was, beautiful, intelligent, passionate. And for the first time in his life, Jack Thompson, the arrogant millionaire who had always judged by appearances, was falling in love for real. The sun was beginning to peak over the New York horizon when Jack and Sarah finally decided to end their night. They had spent hours walking the city streets, talking, laughing, and sharing stories as if they had known each other all their lives. Jack offered to drive Sarah to her home, and she accepted with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. During the car ride, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sound of the radio playing a romantic melody. When they arrived at Sarah's building, a modest apartment block in a quiet neighborhood, Jack found himself wishing the trip had lasted longer. "Well, here we are," said Sarah, her voice soft in the stillness of the morning. Jack turned off the engine and turned to her. "Sarah, I want to thank you for this day. It's been incredible." She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotion and something else that Jack couldn't identify. "Thank you, Jack. I confess I had my doubts about all this, but you've pleasantly surprised me." They looked at each other for a moment, the air charged with a tension that neither of them dared to break. Finally, Jack gathered the courage to speak. "Sarah, I know this started as a challenge, but I'd like to see you again. Not because of any challenge or bet, but because I really want to get to know you better." Sarah's smile lit up her whole face. "I'd love that, Jack." They exchanged numbers, and after a moment of hesitation, Jack leaned in and softly kissed Sarah's cheek. It was a simple gesture, but charged with an emotion that took him by surprise. As he watched Sarah enter her building, Jack realized that something fundamental had changed in him. He was no longer the same man who had started this challenge 24 hours ago. Back in his apartment, Jack found himself unable to sleep. His mind was full of images of Sarah, of her laughter, of the passion with which she talked about art, of the way she had made him question everything he thought he knew about beauty and value. He approached the mirror in his bedroom and looked at himself intently. The man who looked back at him was different. His eyes, normally cold and calculating, now shone with a new light. A light of understanding, of humility, of love. The ring of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. It was Alex. "Jack, my friend." Alex's voice sounded cheerful. "How was your day with Sarah? Did you manage to complete the challenge?" Jack remained silent for a moment, thinking about how to respond. Finally, he said, "Alex, I thank you for this challenge. But I think we were both wrong to approach it that way." "What do you mean?" asked Alex, his voice full of confusion. "Sarah is not a challenge to overcome or an obstacle to conquer. She's a wonderful, intelligent, and passionate person. And I've realized that I've been an idiot all this time, judging people by their appearance instead of who they really are." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Alex spoke again, his voice was full of a mixture of surprise and respect. "Wow, Jack. It seems this challenge has changed you more than I expected." "It has," Jack admitted, "and I'm grateful for it. Alex, I've been living in a bubble, judging people by superficial standards. Sarah has opened my eyes to a much richer and deeper world." Alex remained silent for a moment before responding. "Well, my friend, it seems this challenge has had a much greater impact than I anticipated. I'm happy for you, Jack. I really am." After hanging up, Jack stood looking out the window, watching as the city woke up. For the first time in years, he felt genuine emotion and anticipation for what the future might bring. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries for Jack. He and Sarah began to see each other regularly, each encounter revealing new facets of both of them. One afternoon, while walking through an art gallery, Sarah showed Jack the process of restoring an old painting. Seeing the passion and care with which she worked, the way her expert hands gave new life to a forgotten masterpiece, filled him with an admiration he had never felt before. "It's incredible," Jack murmured, watching as Sarah carefully applied a layer of protective varnish. "The way you can see beyond what's on the surface, how you can reveal hidden beauty. It's like a metaphor for what you've done with me." Sarah looked at him, surprised by his words. "Jack, I haven't done anything. You've always had that inner beauty. You just needed the opportunity to see it for yourself." Those words touched something deep in Jack. He realized that Sarah had not only changed his perspective on others, but also on himself. As they spent more time together, Jack began to reevaluate many aspects of his life. He started to get involved in charitable works, not for the image or tax benefits, but because he genuinely wanted to make a difference. He began to treat his employees with more respect and consideration, valuing their contributions beyond the numbers on a balance sheet. One day, while they were having dinner at Sarah's small apartment, Jack found himself telling her about his childhood, about how his father's pressure to be the best had led him to build a facade of arrogance and superficiality. "I always felt like I had to prove my worth," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "That if I wasn't the richest, the most attractive, the most successful, then I was worth nothing." Sarah took his hand, her eyes full of understanding and affection. "Jack, your worth is not in your bank account or your appearance. It's in your heart, in your capacity to grow and change, in your desire to be better." At that moment, looking into Sarah's eyes, Jack felt something release inside him. Years of insecurities and imposed expectations vanished, replaced by a sense of peace and acceptance he had never experienced before. "I love you, Sarah," he said, the words coming out of his mouth before he could think about them. But as soon as he said them, he knew they were true. "I love you for who you are, for how you make me feel, for how you've helped me see the world and myself in a completely new way." Sarah looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you too, Jack. Not for who you were, but for who you are now and who you're trying to be." They kissed, and in that kiss, Jack felt that everything in his life fell into place. He was no longer the arrogant millionaire who measured people's worth by their appearance or bank account. He was simply Jack, a man in love, learning to see true beauty in the world and in himself. As Jack's relationship with Sarah deepened, he faced new challenges that he had never anticipated before. The world he had lived in for so long, a world of ostentatious luxury and superficial relationships, began to clash with his new perspective on life. One night, Jack took Sarah to a charity gala, an event he used to attend more for the connections and image than for the cause itself. As they walked through the ballroom full of high society people, Jack noticed the looks of surprise and barely disguised whispers. "Is that Jack Thompson?" he heard someone murmur. "And who is that woman? She's not his usual type." Jack felt anger growing inside him, but before he could react, he felt Sarah's hand gently squeezing his. "Don't let it affect you," she whispered. "Their opinions don't define us." Those simple words calmed Jack, reminding him why he had fallen in love with Sarah in the first place. Her inner strength, her ability to see beyond appearances, were qualities he now valued more than any jewel or bank account. Throughout the night, Jack found himself seeing the event with new eyes. Instead of focusing on business connections or impressing others, he became genuinely interested in the charitable cause. He listened to the stories of the people the organization had helped and, for the first time, felt a real desire to contribute in a meaningful way. When it came time to make donations, Jack surprised everyone, including Sarah, by making a substantially larger contribution than he used to. "Why that amount?" Sarah asked him later when they were alone. Jack smiled, taking her hands in his. "Because for the first time I truly understand the impact it can have. It's not about image or tax benefits. It's about making a real difference in people's lives." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of pride and love that made Jack's heart swell with emotion. However, not everyone in Jack's life was happy with his transformation. Some of his old friends and business partners began to distance themselves, bewildered by his new approach to life. One day, while having lunch on a cafe terrace, they ran into Richard, an old associate of Jack's known for his unethical business tactics. "Jack, old friend," said Richard, his gaze running over Sarah with a mixture of confusion and disdain. I've heard rumors, but I couldn't believe them. Is it true that you've been turning down lucrative deals lately? Jack felt Sarah tense beside him, but he remained calm. I've been re-evaluating my priorities, Richard. There's more to life than just accumulating wealth. Richard let out a mocking laugh. Who are you and what have you done with Jack Thompson? Has this lady brainwashed you? Before Jack could respond, Sarah spoke, her voice calm but firm. The real Jack has always been there, Mr. Richard. He's simply decided to be true to his values. Richard gaped at them for a moment, before mumbling a hasty goodbye and leaving. Once alone, Jack took Sarah's hands. Thank you, he said softly, for defending me, for believing in me. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with love and understanding. Always, Jack, we're in this together. That night, as he reflected on the encounter, Jack realized he was at a crossroads. His old life, with all its comforts and certainties, was fading away. But in its place, he was discovering a life full of purpose and true love. He looked at Sarah, peacefully asleep beside him, and knew he had made the right choice. The road ahead might be challenging, but with her by his side, he was ready to face any obstacle. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, Jack made a silent promise. He would continue to grow, continue to learn, and never judge anyone by their appearance again. Because now he knew that true beauty, true wealth was in the heart and soul. And with Sarah by his side, he felt like the richest man in the world. As the months passed, Jack and Sarah's relationship grew stronger every day. However, Jack couldn't help but notice that there were aspects of Sarah's life that remained in the shadows. Whenever he tried to talk about her family or her past, she skillfully changed the subject. One afternoon, as they were walking through the New York Botanical Garden, Jack decided to address the issue directly. Sarah, he began, his voice soft but determined, I've noticed that you never talk about your family. Is there something that worries you? Sarah stopped, her gaze fixed on a distant point. For a moment, Jack feared he had crossed an invisible line. But then she spoke. Jack, there's something I need to show you, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. But I need you to trust me and keep an open mind. Intrigued and a little worried, Jack nodded. Of course, Sarah. I trust you completely. Sarah guided him out of the garden and called a taxi. She gave the driver an address that Jack didn't recognize, in one of the most exclusive areas of New York. They traveled in silence, the tension palpable in the air. Finally, the taxi stopped in front of an impressive mansion. Jack looked at Sarah, confused, but she simply took his hand and guided him to the entrance. To his surprise, the security staff greeted them respectfully and allowed them to enter without questions. Once inside, Jack was left speechless at the opulence that surrounded him. Artworks he recognized as museum pieces adorned the walls, and every detail screamed wealth and refinement. Sarah, what is this place? Asked Jack, his voice full of amazement and confusion. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. This is my home, Jack, or rather my family's home. Jack looked at her, stunned. But how? I don't understand. Sarah guided him to a sofa, and they sat down. My full name is Sarah Elizabeth Vanderbilt. I'm the heiress to one of the oldest and richest families in America. Jack felt the world spinning around him. But your apartment, your work as a restorer. Sarah smiled sadly. It's all real, Jack. I chose to live a simple life, to work in what I love, because I wanted to be valued for who I am, not for my last name or my bank account. Jack remained silent, processing the information. Suddenly, many things began to make sense. Sarah's encyclopedic knowledge of art, her natural refinement, the way she moved with grace, even in the most exclusive circles. Why didn't you tell me before? He finally asked. Sarah took his hands in hers. Because I wanted you to know me, Jack. Not the heiress, not the rich woman, but Sarah. The woman who loves art, who enjoys long conversations, who fell in love with you for who you are, not for what you have. Jack felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, confusion, but above all, a deep respect and love for the woman sitting in front of him. Sarah, he said softly, it doesn't matter if you live in a small apartment or in a mansion. I fell in love with you for your heart, your mind, your soul. This changes nothing. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Do you really mean that? Jack pulled her close, hugging her tightly. Completely. In fact, I think I love you even more now. Your humility, your desire to be valued for who you really are, that's what makes you truly beautiful." They kissed, and in that kiss, Jack felt that all the barriers between them finally fell. They were no longer the arrogant millionaire and the ugly woman from the challenge. They were simply Jack and Sarah, two people who had learned to see beyond appearances and find each other's true value. When they finally separated, Sarah had a radiant smile on her face. "There's someone else I want you to meet," she said, standing up and offering her hand to Jack. She guided him through the mansion until they reached a study full of books and paintings. There, sitting behind an imposing desk, was a middle-aged man with a familiar face. "Jack," said Sarah, "I'd like you to meet my uncle, Alexander Vanderbilt." Jack felt his jaw drop. It was the same Alex who had proposed the initial challenge. Everything began to fall into place in his mind. Alexander stood up, an enigmatic smile on his face. "Welcome, Jack. I see you've finally discovered our little secret." Jack looked between Sarah and Alexander, his mind working at full speed. You planned all this, didn't you?" Alexander nodded. "In part. The initial challenge was real, but Sarah wasn't aware of it at first. When I told her about you and your particular worldview, she decided to participate on her own." Sarah took Jack's hand, her gaze full of sincerity. "Jack, I want you to understand that, although the beginning was planned, everything that has happened between us is real. My feelings, our conversations, all of that came from the heart." Jack sat down, feeling he needed to process all this information. "So, it was all an elaborate lesson?" Alexander approached, his expression serious, but kind. "Not exactly, Jack. It was an opportunity. An opportunity for you to see beyond appearances, to discover what really matters in life." Jack looked at Sarah, remembering all the moments they had shared, the deep conversations, the laughter, the moments of genuine connection. Despite the initial surprise, he realized that none of that had changed. "I understand," he finally said. "And although I feel a little disconcerted, I can't deny that this experience has changed my life for the better." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Jack, I know it's a lot to process. If you need time." Jack interrupted her with a smile. "No, Sarah, I don't need time. Yes, I'm surprised, but this doesn't change how I feel about you. In fact, I think I admire you even more now. You chose a simple life when you could have all this," he gestured, encompassing the luxurious room, "just to be valued for who you really are." Alexander smiled, clearly pleased. "Well, it seems my niece was right about you, Jack. You've proven to be a man of true character." Jack turned to Alexander. "There's something I don't understand. Why me? Why go to all this trouble?" Alexander exchanged a look with Sarah before answering. "Jack, you've been a prominent figure in the business world for years. Your success is undeniable, but your reputation, well, left much to be desired. We saw potential in you, but you needed a push in the right direction," Sarah continued. "When my uncle told me about you and his plan, at first I refused. But then I did some research and saw beyond your facade of arrogance. I saw a man who could do a lot of good in the world if he just learned to see with his heart." Jack remained silent for a moment, reflecting on everything he had learned and experienced in the last few months. Finally, a smile spread across his face. "Well," he said, "I guess I should thank you both. Without this push, as you call it, Alexander, I'd probably still be the same arrogant jerk as before." The three of them laughed, and the tension in the room dissipated. "So, what's next now?" asked Jack, looking at Sarah. She smiled, her eyes shining with love and hope. "That depends on you, Jack. Are you willing to continue this path with me? To build a life based on love, understanding, and the desire to make the world a better place?" Jack didn't hesitate for a second. "Sarah, these last few months have been the happiest and most meaningful of my life. I can't imagine a future without you by my side. So yes, I'm more than willing." They kissed, and Alexander discreetly left the room, leaving them alone. When they finally separated, Jack had a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, I think it's time I used my wealth and influence for something more than my own benefit. How would you feel about starting a foundation together? We could combine your passion for art with social development projects." Sarah's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "That's a wonderful idea, Jack. We could use art as a tool for social transformation, bring beauty and culture to disadvantaged communities." As they discussed their plans with growing excitement, Jack realized how much he had changed. He was no longer the man who measured people's worth by their appearance or bank account. Now he saw the true potential in every human being, the beauty that resides in the heart and soul. That night, as they returned to Sarah's small apartment, which she insisted on keeping despite the revelation of her true identity, Jack felt richer than ever, not because of the money in his bank account or knowing he was in love with an heiress, but because of the wealth of spirit he had discovered in himself and in Sarah. Looking at the woman beside him, Jack knew he had found something much more valuable than any material fortune. He had found true love, understanding, and a purpose in life. And as the city of New York shone under the starry sky, Jack and Sarah walked hand in hand towards a future full of promises, love, and the determination to make the world a better place, one heart at a time. The following months were a whirlwind of activity for Jack and Sarah. Together, they embarked on creating the Thompson Vanderbilt Foundation, an organization dedicated to using art as a tool for social transformation. Jack put all his business experience at the service of this new cause, while Sarah brought her deep knowledge of the art world and her passion for helping others. Together, they formed an unstoppable team. One afternoon, while working on the details of their first major project, an art therapy program for children in hospitals, Jack paused for a moment to observe Sarah. She was bent over a pile of papers, her face illuminated by passion and concentration. At that moment, Jack felt his heart swell with love and admiration. "You know something?" he said, breaking the silence. "I never imagined I could feel like this." Sarah looked up, a curious smile on her face. "Like what?" "So complete," Jack replied. "Before, I always felt like something was missing. No matter how much money I made or how many conquests I had, there was always a void. But now, working with you, building something that can really make a difference, I feel truly fulfilled." Sarah got up and walked around the desk to hug him. "Oh, Jack," she murmured against his chest, "you have no idea how happy it makes me to hear you say that." They stayed like that for a moment, embracing in silence, enjoying each other's presence and the feeling of being exactly where they were meant to be. The Foundation's first event was a resounding success. They organized an art exhibition at a children's hospital, where the kids not only got to enjoy works by renowned artists, but also had the opportunity to create their own pieces under the guidance of art therapists. Seeing the smiles on the faces of those children, some of whom were battling serious illnesses, was a transformative experience for Jack. For the first time in his life, he felt he was doing something truly meaningful. "You see that?" Sarah whispered to him, pointing to a little girl who was laughing as she painted with her hands. "That's true wealth, Jack. The joy, the hope, the ability to create beauty even in the most difficult circumstances." Jack nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "You're right," he managed to say. "And to think I could have missed all this if it weren't for you and Alexander's challenge." Sarah looked at him tenderly. "Don't underestimate yourself, Jack. You always had this inside you. You just needed the opportunity to discover it." As the foundation grew and expanded, Jack and Sarah faced new challenges. Not everyone in the business world understood or supported Jack's new approach. Some of his former partners even tried to sabotage their efforts, fearing that his example might threaten the status quo. But Jack was no longer the man who let himself be intimidated or manipulated. With Sarah by his side, he faced each obstacle with determination and creativity. He used his connections and influence not for his personal benefit, but to promote causes that really mattered. One night, after a particularly difficult day dealing with opposition to one of their projects, Jack and Sarah were sitting on the terrace of their apartment, looking at the lights of New York. "Sometimes I wonder," Jack said quietly, "what would have happened if I had never accepted that challenge, if I had never met you." Sarah intertwined her fingers with his. "I think you would have eventually found your way, Jack. Maybe in a different way, but you would have done it. You have a good heart, even though you tried hard to hide it." Jack smiled, bringing Sarah's hand to his lips to kiss it softly. "Maybe, but I'm infinitely grateful that things happened the way they did. You've taught me so much, Sarah. About love, about life, about what really matters." "And you've taught me," Sarah replied. You've shown me that it's possible to change, grow, become a better version of oneself. You've given me hope in the inherent goodness of people." They looked into each other's eyes, and at that moment, they both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. They had found not only love but also a shared purpose, a mission that gave meaning to their lives. "I love you, Sarah," said Jack, his voice full of emotion, "not just for who you are, but for who you've helped me become." "And I love you, Jack," Sarah replied, her eyes shining with tears of happiness, "for the man you are and for the man you're becoming every day." They kissed under the starry sky of New York, two souls who had found in each other not just a life partner, but also a mission partner. Together they were changing the world, one heart at a time, proving that true beauty and true value reside within. And as the night progressed, Jack and Sarah remained embraced, looking towards the future with hope and determination. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew that together they could overcome any obstacle, because they had discovered the greatest secret of all, that love, compassion, and the desire to make the world a better place are the most powerful forces that exist. And with those forces on their side, there was no limit to what they could achieve. As the Thompson-Vanderbilt Foundation grew in influence and reach, Jack and Sarah found themselves facing unexpected challenges. One of them came in the form of an invitation to a charity gala organized by Jack's family, an event he hadn't attended in years. "I'm not sure I want to go," Jack confessed to Sarah as they read the invitation. "My relationship with my family, well, let's say it's complicated." Sarah looked at him with understanding. "I understand, Jack, but maybe this is an opportunity to close old wounds. Plus, it could be a perfect platform to talk about the Foundation's work." Jack sighed, knowing Sarah was right. "I guess you're right, but I need you to be there with me. I can't face this alone." Sarah took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Of course I'll be with you. Always." The night of the gala arrived sooner than Jack would have liked. As he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, he felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. Sarah, beautiful in an elegant blue dress, approached and put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You'll be fine," she assured him. "Remember who you are now, Jack. Don't let the past define you." Jack nodded, drawing strength from her presence. The gala was as ostentatious as Jack remembered. Familiar faces greeted him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Many hadn't seen him since his transformation, and the whispers didn't take long to start. It was then that Jack saw his father, Robert Thompson, standing on the other side of the room, the man who had shaped much of his life with his constant expectations and criticisms. For a moment, Jack felt like he was that insecure young man again, desperate for his father's approval. But then he felt Sarah's hand in his, and he remembered everything he had learned and achieved in the last few months. "Let's go," he said, heading towards his father with a new determination. Robert Thompson looked at his son with a mixture of surprise and something Jack couldn't identify. Pride, regret. "Jack," said Robert, his voice softer than Jack remembered. "I'm glad you came." "Father," Jack replied, surprised by the calm in his own voice, "I'd like you to meet Sarah, my fiancée." Robert's eyes widened in surprise at the word fiancé, but he greeted Sarah courteously. "I've heard about your foundation," Robert said after a moment. "It seems you're doing good work." Jack felt a wave of emotions. For years he had sought his father's approval, and now that he had it, he realized he no longer needed it to feel complete. "Thank you, Father," Jack replied with a genuine smile. "We're very proud of the work we're doing." An awkward silence settled between them, years of unspoken words and repressed emotions floating in the air. It was Sarah who broke the tension. "Mr. Thompson," she said in her soft but firm voice, "would you like to hear more about our projects? We're especially excited about our art therapy program for children in hospitals." Robert seemed grateful for the intervention. "Of course, I'd love to hear more." As Sarah passionately explained the Foundation's work, Jack observed his father. He saw something he had never noticed before, a glimpse of vulnerability, maybe even regret. When Sarah finished, Robert nodded with approval. "It's admirable work. Jack, I never thought I'd see you involved in something like this." Jack felt a pang of pain at those words, but also a flash of hope. "People change, Father. I've learned a lot in these last few months. Robert looked at Sarah and then back at Jack. "I can see that, and I'm glad for you, son." Those simple words, said with sincerity, touched something deep in Jack. For the first time in years, he felt the gap between him and his father beginning to close. The rest of the night passed surprisingly pleasantly. Jack and Sarah talked with several guests about the foundation, generating interest and support for their projects. To Jack's surprise, even his father approached several times to ask questions and offer suggestions. Towards the end of the evening, Robert approached Jack when he was alone for a moment. "Son," he began, his voice laden with emotion, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not just for your business success, but for the man you've become." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, Father. That means a lot to me." Robert put a hand on his son's shoulder. "I've made many mistakes, Jack. I pushed you too hard, made you believe that only success and money mattered. But seeing you now, the work you're doing, the wonderful woman you're with, I realize you were right to choose your own path." Jack couldn't contain the tears that formed in his eyes. "Dad." They hugged, years of misunderstandings and resentments beginning to dissolve in that gesture. When they separated, Robert looked at his son in a new light. "I'd like to be part of this, if you'll allow me. Maybe I could help with the foundation, offer my experience." Jack smiled, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "We'd love to have you on board, Dad." That night, as they returned home, Jack felt light, as if he had left behind a burden he had been carrying for years. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, noticing his silence. Jack looked at her, his eyes shining with emotion and gratitude. "More than okay. I feel like everything is finally falling into place. And it's thanks to you, Sarah. You gave me the strength to face my past, to be a better version of myself." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You always had that strength inside you, Jack. I just helped you see it." They kissed, and in that kiss Jack felt all the love, gratitude, and promise of a bright future. As the car drove through the streets of New York, Jack reflected on the incredible journey he had embarked on. From being a man obsessed with appearances and material success, he had transformed into someone who valued compassion, love, and service to others. And although he knew he still had much to learn and grow, he was excited about what the future held for him. With Sarah by his side and a new relationship with his father, he felt he could face any challenge life presented him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jack was ready to travel it, with an open heart and his eyes set on a horizon full of possibilities. Because now he knew that true beauty, true worth, didn't reside in appearances or bank accounts. It was in the heart, in the capacity to love, to grow, and to make a difference in the world. And with Sarah by his side, he was ready to continue writing that story, day after day, year after year, for the rest of their lives. 5 years had passed since Jack and Sarah's wedding, and life had brought them more joy and challenges than they could have ever imagined. The Thompson Vanderbilt Foundation had become an international reference in using art as a tool for social transformation. Their programs now extended throughout the United States and were beginning to expand to Latin America and Africa. One autumn afternoon, as Jack was playing with his 3-year-old daughter Lucy in their home's garden, Sarah came out with a radiant smile and unexpected news. "Jack," she said, her eyes shining with excitement, "I just received a call. We've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize." Jack was left speechless, lifting Lucy in his arms. "Are you serious?" "Sarah, that's incredible." They hugged, with Lucy laughing between them, not fully understanding the magnitude of the moment, but infected by her parents' joy. "You know," said Jack, looking around at the life they had built together, "sometimes I still find it hard to believe how much everything has changed, how much I've changed." Sarah caressed his cheek tenderly. "Oh, you've come a long way, my love, but the kindness and compassion were always within you. You just needed the opportunity to discover them." That night, after putting Lucy to bed, Jack and Sarah sat on the terrace, enjoying the tranquility of the New York night. Jack took his wife's hand, feeling a wave of gratitude. "You know, Sarah," he began, his voice soft but full of emotion, "when I think about the man I was before I met you, I barely recognize myself. I was so obsessed with appearances, with accumulating wealth and power. But now I understand that true wealth is in what we can give to others, in the positive impact we can have on the world." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with love and pride. "And look at all you've accomplished, Jack. You haven't just changed your life, but the lives of so many people through the foundation." Jack nodded, thoughtful. "But none of this would have been possible without you, Sarah. You showed me a world beyond my prejudices and my arrogance. You taught me to see beauty in places where I had never looked before." "Oh, Jack," Sarah sighed, cuddling closer to him. "You've taught me so much too. You've shown me that people can change, that love has the power to transform. Together, we've created something beautiful, not just in our family, but in the world." They remained silent for a moment, contemplating the starry sky. Then, Jack spoke again, his voice full of determination. "You know, this Nobel Peace Prize nomination, it's an incredible opportunity, not just for the foundation, but to bring our message to an even wider audience. We could inspire more people to see beyond appearances, to value inner beauty and kindness." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "You're right. We could use this platform to talk about the importance of empathy, compassion, of seeing beyond the superficial. Imagine how many lives we could touch, how many minds we could open." Jack nodded, feeling a wave of inspiration. "We could share our story, Sarah, not just as a love story, but as a testimony to the power of personal transformation and the impact it can have on the world." "I love that idea," said Sarah, her eyes shining with emotion. "We could talk about how our journey began with a challenge that seemed superficial, but led us to discover deep truths about ourselves and about humanity." Jack remained thoughtful for a moment. "You know, I think we should involve more people in this. We could compile stories from people whose lives have been touched by our programs, show how art and culture can be powerful tools for social change." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, and we could invite artists and community leaders to share their experiences. Show that this is not just our work, but the effort of an entire community of people committed to making the world a better place." As they discussed their ideas, Jack felt a deep sense of purpose and gratitude. He looked at Sarah, marveling at how this extraordinary woman had changed his life in so many ways. "I love you, Sarah," he said softly. "Not just for who you are, but for who you've helped me become, for the life we've built together, and for everything that's yet to come." Sarah kissed him tenderly. "And I love you, Jack, for your heart, for your capacity to change and grow, for your dedication to making the world a better place." The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Jack and Sarah worked tirelessly on their presentation for the Nobel Peace Prize, compiling stories, preparing visual materials, and refining their message. Finally, the big day arrived. The auditorium was full of dignitaries, personalities from the art and culture world, and representatives from charitable organizations from around the world. When Jack and Sarah took the stage, hand in hand, they felt the weight of responsibility and the excitement of the opportunity before them. Jack began his speech, his voice clear and full of passion. "A few years ago, I was a very different man. I was blinded by wealth and material success, judging people solely by their appearance. But a challenge changed my life forever." As Jack told his story, he saw how the audience leaned forward, captivated. He spoke about his transformation, about how Sarah had taught him to see true beauty in the world. Then Sarah took the floor, speaking eloquently about the power of art to heal, to unite communities, and to give voice to those who don't have one. Together, they presented the achievements of the Thompson Vanderbilt Foundation, showing images and videos of children in hospitals creating art, of marginalized communities transforming their neighborhoods through murals and sculptures, of elderly people rediscovering joy through music and dance. When they finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Jack and Sarah looked at each other, their eyes shining with tears of emotion and gratitude. That night, after receiving the prize and celebrating with their colleagues and friends, Jack and Sarah retired to their hotel room. Exhausted but exultant, they sat on the balcony looking at the city lights. "We did it, Sarah," Jack said softly. "We really did it." Sarah rested her head on Jack's shoulder. "Yes, my love, and this is just the beginning. Imagine all we can achieve now, with this platform, with this recognition." Jack nodded, his mind already racing with new ideas and possibilities. "You know, I think we should expand our art education programs, reach more schools, especially in disadvantaged areas. Give more children the opportunity to express themselves through art, to discover their creative potential. I love that idea, said Sarah, and we could partner with more museums and galleries, make art more accessible to everyone. Imagine being able to bring masterpieces to communities that have never had the opportunity to experience art firsthand. As they discussed their plans for the future, Jack marveled once again at how much his life had changed. From being a man obsessed with appearances and material success, he had become someone dedicated to making the world a better place, to seeing and cultivating beauty in all places and in all people. You know, Sarah, he said, looking at his wife with love and gratitude, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never accepted that challenge. If I had never met you. Sarah smiled, caressing his cheek. I think the universe has a way of putting in our path what we need, when we need it. You needed to learn to see beyond appearances, and I needed someone who would see the real me, beyond my last name or my bank account. Jack nodded, reflective. And together we've discovered a greater purpose. We've found a way to make the world a more beautiful, more compassionate place. Exactly, said Sarah, and that's the true legacy we're building. It's not just about us, or even about the foundation. It's about inspiring others to see beauty in unexpected places, to value kindness and compassion above appearances or material wealth. Jack hugged Sarah, feeling a deep sense of peace and purpose. You're right, my love, and I can't wait to see what else we can accomplish together. As the night progressed, Jack and Sarah remained on the balcony, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that together, with love, compassion, and determination, they could achieve extraordinary things. And so, under the starry sky, Jack and Sarah silently renewed their commitment not just to each other, but to the mission they had discovered together, to make the world a more beautiful place, one heart at a time. 10 years had passed since that day when Jack accepted Alexander's challenge. A decade of growth, learning, and transformation, not only for Jack and Sarah, but for thousands of people whose lives had been touched by their work. It was a sunny spring morning in New York. Jack was in his office at the Thompson Vanderbilt Foundation headquarters, reviewing the latest reports from their projects around the world. The walls were covered with photographs and artworks created by the beneficiaries of their programs: children in hospitals, elderly in nursing homes, youth from underprivileged neighborhoods. Each image told a story of transformation and hope. The intercom buzzed, pulling Jack from his thoughts. "Mr. Thompson," said his assistant's voice, "there's a young man here who wants to see you. He says it's important." Jack frowned, intrigued. He didn't have any scheduled appointments for that morning. Did he give a name? "Yes, sir. He said his name is Michael Harrison." The name didn't sound familiar to Jack, but something inside told him he should receive the young man. "All right, send him in." Moments later, the door opened and a young man in his early 20s entered. He was tall and thin, with a face that showed signs of having lived through difficult times, but his eyes shone with a determination that Jack immediately recognized. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," said the young man, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me." Jack shook his hand, noticing the calluses and scars. This was a young man who had worked hard in his life. "Please sit down." "How can I help you, Michael?" Michael took a seat, visibly nervous but determined. "Mr. Thompson, I've come to thank you. You changed my life, although you don't know it." Jack looked at him curiously. "How's that, Michael?" The young man took a deep breath before beginning his story. 10 years ago, I was a 10-year-old kid living on the streets of New York. My mother had died, my father was in jail, and I was alone, angry at the world. One day I stole a wallet in the subway. Jack felt his heart race. Could it be? Michael continued. "The man I stole from caught me, but instead of turning me into the police, he took me to a community center. There I was introduced to an art program for at-risk youth, funded by your foundation." Jack's eyes filled with tears as he remembered that day. The day Sarah had taken him to that same community center, showing him the real impact they could have on people's lives. "Art saved me, Mr. Thompson," said Michael, his voice full of emotion. "It gave me an outlet for my anger, a way to express myself. It gave me hope, and now 10 years later I've just graduated from university with a degree in fine arts, and I want to give back some of what I received." Jack stood up from his chair and walked around the desk, hugging the young man tightly. "Michael, you have no idea what it means to me to hear your story. You are the reason we do what we do." When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. Jack looked at the young man, seeing in him not only the result of their work, but a reflection of his own journey of transformation. "Michael," said Jack, "would you like to work with us? We could use your experience and your passion to help more young people like you." Michael's eyes lit up. "Are you serious? It would be an honor, Mr. Thompson. Please call me Jack," he said with a smile. That night, Jack told Sarah about his encounter with Michael. They were sitting in their garden, watching their children, Lucy and little Alex, play under the setting sun. "It's amazing, isn't it?" said Sarah, her eyes shining with emotion. "How a simple act of kindness can change an entire life." Jack nodded, reflective. "And to think that it all started with a challenge that seemed so superficial. I never imagined that accepting that challenge would lead me to discover my true purpose in life." Sarah took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Life has a curious way of taking us exactly where we need to be, don't you think?" "It does," said Jack, looking at his children with love. "And I'm grateful for every step of the way, even the difficult ones. Because they brought me here with you, with our family, doing work that truly matters." As the sun set over New York, Jack reflected on the incredible journey his life had been over the last 10 years. From being a man obsessed with appearances and material success, he had become someone dedicated to seeing and cultivating beauty in all places and in all people. And most importantly, he had learned that true beauty, true worth, didn't reside in appearances or bank accounts. It was in the heart, in the capacity to love, to grow, and to make a difference in the world. Looking at Sarah, at their children, thinking of Michael and all the lives they had touched through their work, Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment and gratitude. The circle had come full. What had begun as a challenge to marry an ugly woman for a day had become a life filled with love, purpose, and true beauty. And as the sky filled with stars, Jack knew with certainty that this was just the first page of a new chapter in their story. A story of love, personal growth, and the constant pursuit of making the world a better place, one heart at a time. Because now he knew that true beauty is not found on the outside, but in the actions we take, in the love we give, and in the difference we make in the lives of others. And with Sarah by his side, he was ready to continue writing that story, day after day, year after year, for the rest of their lives.